And then there was nothing at all. I jerked awake, falling off the bench as the shock of returning to the world hit me all at once. The frosted grass felt cool under my fingers, but my entire body felt like it was burning up. I was shaking as I slowly stood up, seeing the evening sun in the sky as I tried to get my bearings. I managed to make my way back to the bench, sitting down and putting my sweating face in my hands despite the chill in the air. The bench, real and solid, was reassuring under me, but I still didn't trust it. How could I trust anything after that? The feeling of mud under my fingernails, the terror of the thing reaching for me, it had been so real. It was like nothing I had felt before. I reached up and touched my face, expecting to find it dirty, but it was as clean as it had been this morning. What did it mean? The hallucinations, the visions, they had never been like that. If you could even call that a hallucination. Could hallucinations let you feel the chill of cold rain running down your spine? The shock wave of an artillery strike rattling your bones? I don't know, but I doubted it. No, this was something more. Perhaps it was a warning. It sounded absurd, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I laid down on the bench, letting the cool wood of its seat press against me as my feverish brain spun, still hot from the experience. Okay, think. Think. Put it all together. You started getting these snippets when you first began to consume the flesh. The red raw from that room that you followed the man into so seemingly long ago. It had started out as just words that you would hear, audibly, before transitioning into visual hallucinations, and now, after that, seemingly entire episodes of events that you have never witnessed. Despite your observations, no other person that has consumed the meat is experiencing these symptoms. I found it always helped soothe my mind to break things down into their base components, smaller and smaller bits until everything was a nice, clean line that was easy to follow. Doing that now, despite my panic, I could feel my thoughts settling, just a little bit. They were still everywhere, fragments of ideas and questions swirling around, but I was able to slowly pluck a few of them from the tornado and put them together, all while concentrating on controlling my breathing, focusing on the cold, smooth surface of the bench. My eyes were shut, and I worried that perhaps one of my followers would wander over here and see me in this disheveled state, but there was no point in worrying about it now. Just concentrate on what happened. Try to piece it together. Those who get lost in the present were doomed to never learn from the past. I think I read that in a book somewhere. Or maybe I imagined that, too. Focus. Focus. One thing at a time. What was causing these intense hallucinations? It seemed obvious. It was the meat, the unverified substance that I have been consuming for weeks now. Alright, that was an acceptable conclusion for now. Question 2. Why was it not affecting anyone else? That was harder. Perhaps it was because I had started to eat it earlier than everyone else. Perhaps. But it was not that much earlier, and I would assume that they would be showing at least some symptoms by now. Perhaps it was me, specifically. It could be that there was something about me that caused the substance to affect me in this extreme way, but what that could be, I had no idea. It's not like I was particularly special. Or maybe I really was special. Perhaps that was what I had been missing. Perhaps I had been chosen. I had been thinking of the visions and hallucinations as something to conquer, to get to submit. But maybe I was thinking about it wrong. It could be that these were actually blessings. Warnings, even. I thought back to the phrase I had heard, clear as day when I had first started receiving these messages. It had told me to figure out who to trust. Sure, it had been in a roundabout way, but that was what it had said, in essence. I had followed that advice, and look where it had gotten me. I was top of the food chain, head honcho, leader of the pack. There was no discrediting that. In my desperation to get the voices to stop, I had been ignoring them, and perhaps by doing that, I had given up on so many opportunities that were presented to me. But what if I were to look into them, really examine them? The meat had been giving me ideas. This was true. From the very beginning, it had put into me the idea of leadership, of leading the weak and foolish. Then the voices had begun, and I had thought that I was going insane. But, looking back at it, I realized that perhaps I had been guided instead. There was the reminder to figure out who you could trust as well. I remember, near the beginning, I had suspicions of one of the men who had commanded a small group of vagrants, using them to commit petty crimes. I had taken him into the fold, put him into a larger position of power, thinking that with his already developed leadership skills he could be a powerful force. And indeed, at first it had seemed that things were going well. But then one night, as I struggled to fall asleep as I often do, a snippet of words came into my head. "I don't want you hanging out with that Dismas anymore. He's bad news. Once a thief, always a thief. That's what Mom always used to say." It was one of the first times that this had happened to me, and I had bolted upright, convinced that someone was in the tent with me. Looking around, I saw nothing, but still the words echoed in my ears. I had no idea what to make of them, at least until I was finally able to settle back down and let my mind wander and think of my newly acquired leadership and those that were underneath me. Now, the man's name was not Dismas, but nevertheless I made sure to keep a much closer eye on him in the following days. And lo and behold, what do I find but him stealing food and goods behind my back, hoarding it all to himself. I had him banished, of course, kicked out never to return, and I had not thought much of it since. But perhaps I had been too hasty to dismiss what had happened. Was I really getting warnings from the food I consumed? Prophecies, even? I had never been one to believe in things like that, but then again, a lot of things have changed in these past few weeks of my life, and the fact that no one else had been affected. Perhaps I really was special. An oracle, even. One who gets hints of the future, a touch of the divine. A slow smile crept across my face as I considered that, despite my throbbing headache. Oh yes, I liked that idea very much. Not many could claim to have the gift of foresight, or at least the knowledge of things that they shouldn't. But here I am, having done it multiple times already. My smile grew even larger as I rolled the thought over in my head. It just made perfect sense. The visions, the prophecies, they were not clear when I first received them. But when had any soothsayer ever claimed that the future was an easy thing to grasp? But I had figured it out, hadn't I? Oh yes. Yes, I had. A slight giggle escaped my lips, but I quickly slapped my hand over my mouth to stop the noise. No need to start laughing by myself in the park, or else people really would believe that I was crazy. I slowly lowered my hand, smile still on my face but laughter under control, at least for now. It just felt so good to have that kind of power, that ability that put you so far above the common folk. I was more than special. I was unique. What more could one ask for? I was feeling quite pleased with myself, when suddenly a thought occurred to me. If what I had been seeing really was visions of the future, or knowledge of things I should not know, then what was I to take away from what I had just seen moments ago? War. That was what. I had seen war. And monsters. A jolt suddenly sent me upright as I realized what had been shown to me. I must return home immediately. Not only had the subject of the vision been one of the most foreboding things I had ever seen, but the intensity of it had far exceeded anything that had come before it. Clearly, this was something to be worried about. I headed back to my tent, hurrying, but not rushing. It was important to not give off the impression that something was amiss. Otherwise, people start to panic, and panic made people difficult to control. No, I needed to move with urgency, but also with grace. Thankfully, I felt I was under much more control now that I had given myself time to think through this instead of jumping to the worst possible conclusion. I slipped past the clearing where a large number of my congregation were gathered, eating food and generally just passing the time. I saw with some level of satisfaction that there were several people there eating the meat that I had provided, proving that I was maintaining my sway over them, as I should be. I looked around as I got nearer to my tent, noting that the sun was already nearly set. It would be night soon, and the chill in the air would be increasing. I didn't mind, however. I still felt hot from my experience earlier in the day, and I figured it might even be good for me. As for everyone else, they could learn to deal with it. It wasn't that cold anyway. Nearing my tent, I saw Hagar dutifully sitting nearby, nodding off as the day grew long. But I simply couldn't allow that. I needed her now. Hagar! She shot up quickly, nearly falling off the rickety chair that she had been sitting in. I rolled my eyes, but gave her a chance to recover. She wasn't the brightest woman, but I could rely on her to carry out at least simple instructions to the letter. Yet another perk of being in charge. Go and get as many people as you can to the clearing, the one with all the picnic benches. There is something I need to tell everyone, and it's urgent, so hurry. She nodded, but then also gave me a strange look, which in turn gave me pause. She had never looked at me like that before. What is it? I said, but she simply shook her head and ran off. I narrowed my eyes, quickly ducking inside the tent to check myself in the small hand mirror that I kept in there. Perhaps I had some grass on my face from my fall in the park earlier today. The tent was the way I had left it, noticeably cooler now that the sun was going down, but I didn't pay it any mind. Instead, I went over and grabbed the cheap thing, expecting a smudge or grass stain. But that wasn't it at all. Instead, in the scratchy glass, I saw my own reflection, nary a hair out of place, except for the huge grin that stared back at me. Shocked, I reached up and touched my mouth, surprised to find that I was, indeed, holding that expression. I hadn't even realized. No wonder she had been looking at me like that. I was scaring myself with how wide the grin was, completely out of place on my normally serious face. I tried to return to a more neutral expression, but found myself struggling, the corners of my mouth lifting back up without an input from me, entirely independent of my own desires. I felt a growing state of panic, but swallowed it down, forcing myself back under control. Concentrating, I made the smile sink, more and more, before I finally had my lips pressed together in a thin line. I stared at that expression for a solid minute, making sure that the smile didn't return, but much to my relief nothing changed. This was worrying, to say the least, but I didn't have time to think about it too much. For now, I would simply have to compartmentalize it away and deal with it some other time. I needed to get everyone prepared, so that my little kingdom would not crumble so soon after I had constructed it. I gave myself a quick once-over, smoothing out any wrinkles that I could see in my clothes. I really needed to get a proper home to work out of. Perhaps that would be the next major thing I did. Get everyone into a shelter or something like that. With everyone pooling their resources and perhaps securing some proper paying jobs, it may just be economically viable. But here I was getting ahead of myself again. One thing at a time, I needed to go address my commune. I reached for the tent flap, opening it to find that the sun had set and it was truly and properly night now. The street lamps glowed with a slight hum, coating everything in their fluorescent light. I quickly approached the clearing, pleased to find that nearly everyone was there already. There were a couple of stragglers, there always were, but that was alright. They could hear about what I had to say later. These things always circulated. I just needed the majority. I hiked myself up on a small box so that everyone could see me and peered out over the crowd. They looked at me expectantly, some with annoyance in their gaze. Just because I was the leader didn't mean that all of them loved me. I would have to make sure to word this right, perhaps leave out some of the more unbelievable details. I felt a slight nervousness standing here, so many faces looking up at me, but I quickly suppressed it. This was no time for things like that. I took a deep breath and began. Everyone, thank you all for coming out here so late at night like this, but I'm afraid that I have urgent news. I do not want to mince words or waste everyone's time, so I will get right to it. I was recently contacted by a friend in the park, and I have reason to believe that we may all be in grave danger. That certainly got everyone's attention. Most of the crowd had been shifting around before, half listening, but now they were all staring at me intently, waiting to see what I would say next. I enjoyed that feeling of being important, of being someone people would listen to. I realized quickly where this train of thought was going, and I casually lifted up my hand to my face to make sure that I wasn't smiling. I wasn't, thank goodness, as that would have been a very bad look after just telling everyone that they were in danger. Instead, I took a deep breath and continued. Now, I know that this is seemingly coming from nowhere, but I have received warnings from this informant before, and I know that they are trustworthy. I felt a bead of sweat running down the back of my head, but I made no indication of it on my face. War is coming. There will be invaders coming to us, to our homestead, and we must be prepared. There is no guarantee that everything will be all right, but if you all rally behind me, I will make sure that we are ready for the trials and tribulations that we will face in the coming days. I gestured broadly with my hands, making it clear that I was talking to everyone as I addressed them. Individually, we are weak, but together, we are strong. We can do anything, as long as we all work as one, and follow my lead. I smiled then, trying to be welcoming, but also strong-looking. The results were middling. My supposedly rousing speech was not getting through to them, it seemed. For even these homeless, downtrodden folk were far too comfortable to want to hear about things like war and invaders. My shoulders sagged a little as I felt them slipping away from me, and I felt that awfully familiar pressure of panic building in my throat. Even now I could see some of them whispering to one another, throwing glances my way, as they no doubt talked about my seemingly fragile mental state. This was the end of my short reign as monarch of the forgotten. This failed speech had shattered the fragile trust that people had put in me. I would need a miracle at this point. Everyone, listen to this! A man ran into the crowd, a person I recognized but did not particularly know very well. He held a portable radio in his hand, and as everyone crowded around him to see what he was talking about, he cranked it up to max volume so that even I could hear a male voice speaking in a frantic tone, even from this distance. Sighting of these strange animals as far away as Eastern Europe. Reports are hazy, but it seems they primarily attack those who are isolated or in small groups. It is being said that they attack at what seems to be random and then attempt to drag people back with them to where they came from. We are unsure of the exact details, but it is being recommended by the authorities to stay indoors and in large groups for the time being as they attempt to figure out what is going on. In the meantime, make sure to keep your radio on as we... Wait, hold on. We are receiving word that we have a person here who has actually managed to encounter one of these animals and get away. We are putting them on now. Sir, you are on the air. A new voice now, this one distinctly grainier, but with the words still clear. Yeah, hey, hi. It's true, it's all true. What they are saying, I mean. I was walking home, alone, when all of a sudden I heard something off in the woods to the side of me. I tried looking to see what it was, but there was nothing, so I kept walking. But then all of a sudden there was this thing that jumped out at me. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a bear, kind of, but it was all red and wet. It had a mouth that was way too big. And the strangest part was, and you're not gonna believe me here, it smelled really good. Like chocolate, kind of, but more than that. The radio cut back to the original announcer, who continued to talk about precautions for people to take, but nobody was listening anymore. They were murmuring among themselves, talking about what they had just heard. And me? I was ecstatic. My vision had proven true. There really were monsters, and there really was a war. I truly was special. Nobody was giving me strange glances now, that was for certain. It was obvious who should be in charge around here. Even a blind man could see it. Now I just needed to rein them all in. I opened my mouth and addressed the crowd. Please, I repeated again, begging the man in front of me. Please. I could feel the sharp pain digging into my leg as the thing buried its long teeth into my flesh. I held on to the shelf with all my strength, but I could feel it slipping. I had always known that this was going to happen, but now that the time was finally here, I realized I wasn't ready, that I would never be ready. There was only one other way out for me now, and I needed the man in front of me, the man I had just attacked and tried to sentence to this very fate, to help me. All I could do was beg. He looked down at his gun, a revolver, and looked back at me. His face was pale and gaunt, his dark stubble a sharp contrast to his white face. His black coat swirled around him, so much so that I thought he might have been the Reaper. He looked me in the eyes, asking for confirmation without saying a word, and I nodded, telling him yes, that it was okay, that this is what I wanted. Anything was better than being dragged back into the waiting maw of the thing that even now tightened its slimy, damp grip on me. He aimed his gun at me, and, never taking his eyes off of mine, pulled the trigger. And nothing happened. I should have known. I didn't deserve anything less, not after the things I had done, that I had enabled. But still I had hoped against hope that maybe I could avoid what was coming to me. The last of my strength left my body and I flew backwards, raw hands grabbing at my face and neck as I screamed. Not even words, but just noise as I got lost in the darkness. The last thing I saw was the man, his dark coat and white, shocked face looking at me as I fell into the endless pit. And then there was nothing at all. For the second time today, I cracked my eyes open as heat ran through my entire being. I was still standing on the box, somehow avoiding falling off of it during my little episode. I was grateful to find that I was still upright, and glancing around it was clear that not much time had passed, unlike last time. It seemed that it was, at most, a few minutes, and most people had not even noticed that I had been standing still with my eyes closed for that time. Too wrapped up they were, talking about what they had heard on the radio. Several people that were closest to me were looking at me with concern, however, so I flashed them a quick smile to dissuade their worries. I still felt like I had a fever running up and down my body, but I knew I couldn't miss this chance. I had to strike while the iron was hot, and worry about what I had just seen later. "You see?" I yelled, getting everyone's attention again. "This is exactly what I was talking about. These things, these were the invaders I was warning you about. They stretch as far away as Europe, and soon they will be at our door. But I can prepare us. I can lead us. Put your trust in me, and I assure you it will be their heads on the plate, not yours." There was silence for a moment, as everyone glanced at one another, unsure of how to react. Then, from the back of the crowd, there was a cheer. Looking closer, I could see it was Hagar, yelling frantically with an almost desperate look in her eyes. "Yeah, she can lead us. I don't want to be grabbed by one of those things. She can lead us." She cheered alone, at first, but was soon joined in by others, and then more and more, until the entire crowd was cheering for me. I grinned at them, holding my hands up in the air as I yelled to be heard over the crowd's cheers. "I have already warned you once about what was coming, and I have been proven right. And I promise you, I will do it again and again and again. And I will keep us safe. And as long as you are listening to me and do what I say, then I promise once again that no harm will come to you. With me, not only will you never go hungry again, But I will lead us to a new beginning, a new chance, full of opportunities. We will ride out this storm, and when it is over, we will be the ones on top. At that, a new cheer rose up from the crowd, echoing off the tall buildings that circled us. Then, one person started to chant my name, and soon it was another, then another, until it was the entire crowd. "Athaliah!" they yelled. "Athaliah! Athaliah! Athaliah!" I laughed then, unable to help myself, but nobody cared. I let their cries for me carry me up and up until it felt like I was floating in the clouds, with the ecstasy of it all nearly sweeping me off my feet. I laughed, and threw my head back to look at the sky and see the stars, almost as if to say that I was up there, equal to them. But the lights of the city burned too bright, and there were no stars in the sky.